and they've got some.
President Trump's new tariff faced widespread criticism from US business groups, warning of negative impacts on costs, jobs, and the economy. While some supported the move to protect domestic manufacturers, the broader consensus raised concerns about inflation and retaliatory measures. Meanwhile, UK Business Secretary Jonathan Reynolds announced plans to negotiate a trade deal to mitigate the impact of Trump's 10% tariffs on British goods. The goal is to reduce economic strain caused by the tariffs. The German Automotive Industry Association criticised Trump's new tariffs, warning they would harm US consumers, companies and the global car industry. It called on the EU to respond forcefully while remaining open to negotiations. While Australian Prime Minister Albanese and his rival Peter Dutton vowed to protect national interests amid potential US tariffs on Australian beef. While rejecting retaliatory tariffs, Australia focuses on expanding exports to Southeast Asia and India, despite US criticism of its tech laws and beef ban. Here's what Anthony Albanese, Australian Prime Minister, had to say.
This is why our government will not be seeking to impose reciprocal tariffs. We will not join a race to the bottom that leads to higher prices and slower growth. We will stand up for Australia. We will continue to make the strongest case for these unjustified tariffs to be removed from our exporters. Our existing free trade agreement with the United States contains dispute resolution mechanisms. We want to resolve this issue without resorting to using these, as we do support continued constructive engagement with our friends in the United States.
Colombian Foreign Minister Laura Sarabia stated that Colombia remains competitive in the US market despite Trump's 10% tariff. President Gustavo Petro criticized the move, emphasizing that tariff changes should focus on job creation, not protectionism. European politicians and a German industry group criticized US tariffs announced by President Trump today, calling for a measured response. The UK hopes its economic deal with the US will reduce the impact of the 10% tariff. The EU, facing a 20% tariff, aims for a proportionate response to protect its businesses and citizens. Here's what Ursula von der Leyen, European Commission President, had to say.
Trump's announcement of universal tariffs on the whole world, including the European Union, is a major blow to the world economy. I deeply regret this choice. Let's be clear-eyed about the immense consequences. The global economy will massively suffer. Uncertainty will spiral and trigger the rise of further protectionism. The consequences will be dire for millions of people around the globe, also for the most vulnerable countries, which are now subject to some of the highest.
Brazil is evaluating potential responses to the US's 10% tariffs, including the World Trade Organization for Defense. Congress approved a bill outlining a framework for trade retaliation, which requires presidential ramification. Brazil remains open to dialogue, disputing US claims of reciprocal tariffs, citing ongoing trade surpluses with the US. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney recognised that Trump uphold key aspects of the US-Canada relationship. However, he noted that the 25% tariffs imposed over fentanyl concerns are still in place. Beijing strongly opposed the new US tariffs, pledging countermeasures to protect its interests. China argued that the tariffs violate international trade rules and harm global economic development. It called for the US to cancel the tariffs and resolve trade differences through dialogue, warning that the trade wars have no winners. A senior Indian government official stated that the Commerce Ministry is assessing the impact of US tariffs. They described the situation as a mixed bag, suggesting both positive and negative effects. The official emphasised that it should not be seen as a major setback for India. Taiwan's cabinet criticised the 32% tariffs as very unreasonable and vowed to address the issue with the US government. The move reflects Taiwan's opposition to the tariff imposed by the US. Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba criticized US uniform tariffs, highlighting Japan's role as a major US investor. Japan's trade minister expressed strong regret over the US's new 24% tariffs on Japanese imports, urging Washington not to apply them. He warned that the tariffs would negatively affect the US economy by hindering Japanese investment. Japan also raised concerns that the tariffs violate WTO rules and the Japan-US trade agreement. Here's what Yoshimasa Hayamashi, Japanese Chief Cabinet Secretary, had to say.
発表を受け、改めて米国政府に対し、今般の措置が極めて遺憾である旨伝えるとともに、措置の見直しを強く申し入れたところでございます。今般の措置をはじめ、米国政府による広範な貿易制限措置は、日米両国の経済関係、ひいては世界経済や多角的貿易体制全体等に大きな影響を及ぼしかねないと考えます。
Thailand's Prime Minister said the country has a strong plan to manage the 36% US tariffs and hopes to negotiate a reduction. The government aims to mitigate the impact of the new levies on its economy. We are now joined by Dr. Jayjit Bhattacharya, President of the CDEPR, located in New Delhi, to discuss this further. Thank you very much for joining us. These tariffs sound significant. They're reaching all corners of the world, over 100 countries, over 60 of which have a higher than 10% impact on them. How will the average American and also global consumer feel the impact of these tariffs on their daily lives?
The immediate impact will obviously be on the American consumers. So let's just play it out. What will happen is that because of the price rise that these tariffs will induce, the Americans will be consuming less. It just means that there'll be less that will be produced elsewhere, because the US economy and the US market is one of the largest in the world. And therefore, the exporting nations will start producing less because the consumption will go down. So there'll be less jobs, there will be less income. And once these exporters and those who depend on those exports have less income, they will be spending less in their own economies, which will trigger a recessionary headwind in that sense. I would not say that will lead to a recession, but a downward pressure on their economies. And the same is obviously going to play out in US. So it's a perfect lose-lose kind of a scenario because of the way it's being triggered. So I will not question that US may or may not need to put the tariffs in. It's just the manner in which it's being put in, which is a challenge, which is going to lead to a lot of pain in the short to medium term. And to fix that over a period of time will be quite difficult to do. You can't simply pick up capacities and plonk them elsewhere. And
Yes.
also, let's look at the dream of putting in manufacturing back in US with the kind of expected wages that the US workers have. Most manufacturing becomes unviable ab initio, which is why they did not move back to US. So by increased tariffs, all that will happen is that US will continue to import from outside, but the US consumers, the American consumers, will be paying more, and therefore they'll start consuming less, and therefore what I just said a little while ago will start playing out.
Dr. Bhattacharya, so how long will both the people in the US and people abroad, let's use India, start to feel the effects of these tariffs, and how long, let's say Trump keeps them in place throughout his 4-year term, and until we feel the end of it? Analysts have warned about inflation, possible recessions around the world. How long until the average consumer, both American and, let's use the example of India, will start to feel the effects of these tariffs?
No, if I look at it from an Indian perspective, it's not just the tariffs, because if you look at the trade barriers, the foreign trade barriers report that came out, I think 2 days back, it also means that India will be the point of extraneous non-trade issues that will be brought into the table, such as internet shutdowns, such as requests to bring down material, which is a law and order for the country. trade shutdowns happen in India in a non-discriminatory manner, applicable to both domestic and international players, and it is done for the sake of law and order. We don't want riots to suddenly break out thanks to the internet, or even pressurizing India into reducing or removing the price caps on some of the essential medical devices, such as stents in the heart and knee replacements and so on and so forth. So as we move forward, we will be seeing that the bilateral trade agreements will start taking shape. And within that bilateral trade agreements, we'll see these kind of pressures coming in, which are really non-trade kind of pressures. In addition, agriculture will stick out on both sides. Every country would like to protect their farmers. And therefore, those will be points of intransience that we see. So even though the bilateral trade agreement that is being worked out between India and US seems to be the light at the end of the tunnel from these tariffs that are being talked about, it's not going to be an easy job. And therefore, you will see the stock market reacting that even though the tariffs that were eventually put in India is significantly lower than what was expected, the stock market is still going down because it factors in the future, and the future doesn't seem to be a very smooth ride in that sense, because of the reasons that I just mentioned, that the BTA that we're talking about will not be really a very easy thing to do. And so coming back to your original question, by when will we start feeling the pinch? It will be right away. Investors are losing money in the stock market. The exporters will start feeling the pinch. We already had Section 232 imposed on a whole bunch of things, including steel and so on and so forth, and aluminium. The only other change that happened was that pharmaceuticals was taken out of Section 232. So you'll see the pharma stocks are going up. But the rest of it, we're taking the hit immediately.
Dr. Bhattacharya, I just wanted to go through these numbers that the President Trump's office has officially put out with the chart. So obviously you have India here saying that India charges 52% tariffs, and so the US is discounting those to a 26% tariff. Donald Trump has phrased this as the fact that America has been treated poorly by countries all around the world. How fair enough is that of an assessment?
There is a history to these differential tariffs. When the developing countries were coming out of colonization, there was no capital to set up the capacities. So if we don't have some kind of a protectionism for these fledgling industries that are coming up or were coming up in the developing countries and continue to come up in many developing countries, they will not stand a chance against the behemoth industries that are already set up in the Western countries. If we don't put these tariffs, it would just imply that the domestic companies will never be able to put their roots in, because they can never be able to have the scale or the costings that companies in the West would have. So over a period of time, you will see strong companies coming out of the then developing countries. And I'm putting South Korea in it, Taiwan in it. Japan was war ravaged. Japan comes in, and so does India. Now, over a period of time, maybe some of them, the economies have matured, such as the Korean economy, the Japanese economy. But the Indian economy, if you look at it, it's still not a developed economy. We have one of the lowest per capita income in the world. We are, strangely, the fourth largest economy in the world, and therefore the fourth richest country in the world, but one of the poorest in terms of per capita. We need to continue to work on fixing that. And therefore, there needs to be safeguards put into place to support the local industries to come up, because how else will jobs happen? And once that happens, we can have the level playing field. In spite of that, India has really brought down tariffs on multiple issues across the boards. And therefore, I think if you look at it from an Indian lens, we have been a very, very responsible player in the international market, in global trade. In fact, we have put the least number of sunset reviews of anti-dumping duties. Sunset reviews is that every 5 years, when the anti-dumping duties get reviewed and they're put again, US is in fact one of the highest in terms of putting sunset reviews. They have put anti-dumping duties over a 40-year period, whereas India tries to remove it in 5 to 10 years, telling the industry that you can't be fledgling forever. So, now grow up and compete with the rest of the world. whereas a more mature economy like US continues to put anti-dumping duties for 40 years and beyond. And so, there are compulsions at a local level that plays out, and the local governments react to those compulsions and put the duties accordingly. So to pass
Dr. Jajit Bhattacharya, thank you very much. I'm really sorry we've ran out of time. We have to move